All right. So before we start off, a couple of ground rules, right? Few things that we ask from you is it's a community event, right? This is not a very formal event. So one of the things I want to emphasize on is we're here to help each other out. We're here to help you achieve more. And one of the kind of points that we want to focus on is if you do have any questions, don't be afraid to ask them. For the questions, there is one prerequisite that I would highly hope you could listen to, and that is put the questions in the Q&A session. Not the Q&A session, but on top of the chat, you have a Q&A tab. That's just going to help me to filter out the questions from comments. So it's going to be a lot easier for me to just go, back and forth and see what I need to answer. So if you do have any questions during the session, just drop them in the Q&A. That way I can focus on that whenever I have the time to go through them and answer one by one, or if I have more of them for a similar topic, just go through the topic in general. All right. What else? Yeah, the session is going to be recorded, so you're going to be able to afterwards watch it in case you have to sign off or somebody who wasn't able to join in. There is going to be a second session that you can actually register to. Just give me a second. I'm going to post in the link. I can see Giannis already got in front of me. Thanks for that. So yeah, you can sign in for the second session as well. On the second session, we're going to have a similar approach, but we're going to be focusing on a few other visuals. So today we're going to be focusing on what we usually call the core visuals. So those are going to be time-based visuals, category-based visuals like combo and combo bar visuals and donut chart. Whereas on the second session, we're going to try to focus on charts that are a little bit more specific when it comes to their use cases. Those are going to be things like map visuals, graph and network type of visuals. So that would allow you to see a bigger spectrum of the visuals, because going through 10 different visuals in 1 hour takes a lot of effort and just too fast paced for anybody to be useful. So we're going to be splitting them up. So make sure you also register for the second session. So that goes there. All right. What else we can go through? One thing we're going to go through right here is, let me share the screen. Oh. Shared and closed it, right? Because hide button is right next to stop sharing. Convenient. All right, so one of the things to remember, if you want to be a part of the mini challenge for the Onyx Data Challenge for Shark Tank Dataset, you need to go to our website. That's one of the options. Or in the Onyx Dataset itself, in the event description, you have a hyperlink towards the registration. If you open up our website, right here on the top, you're going to have a banner where you can register for the event or the mini challenge specifically. Then once you open up the registration, you can sign in to get a ZoomCharts account. Now, why the ZoomCharts account is needed is we provide you with a developer's license free of charge. That allows you to work with the visuals, enjoy all the paid features, and have nothing to worry about. Now, these licenses are particularly meant for individual use and not for commercial use, but they allow you to go through the visuals, play with them around, create a report, and submit it. So that's going to be fully enough to explore the capabilities of the chart. So you either sign in and get a ZoomCharts account. If you already do have an account, you can already use an existing. So for example, I can sign in with my account. Oh no, data leak, right? Seeing my email. There we go. Let's sign in. The registration link, Gori, you meant for the event itself? So for the mini challenge? That's going to be this one. So once I sign, there we go. Once I sign in, you're going to be brought up to the second screen. On the second screen, you can see I can activate the developer's license. In this case, yeah, I also need to activate the developer's license because I'm using an actual active license, so I don't have this developer's license per se. But in order to activate it, just click that you read the terms and conditions. Make sure you read them just to be sure. You can activate the license. And you can get a temporary, basically, email for your account where the visuals are active and you have an assigned license. Now, if you go back, You can also see here's a separate link for the submission. And as for the submission, just go to the submission page. Okay, in this case, you already can see that I provided my submission. Let's read the report, see if I can resubmit it. Perfect. So you're going to have this screen available for you where you provide the report name. So whatever is on how you name the report, name it here, provide a little bit of a description, maybe provide a little bit of about, let's say, the main points that you argued here, the main things that you focused on, and what the report is all about. Then one thing we also ask you for here is a LinkedIn URL profile. Now, the main reason why we want to have a LinkedIn URL profile is because what we're going to be doing from our side is the top reports from this challenge are actually going to become a part of our report example gallery. And in order not to kind of, say that we developed this, we want to give full credit to the author, there's going to be a hyperlink towards your profile to the LinkedIn. So think about it as another great way on how you can share your work in the community and out there in the public world. And that can lend you, possible additional job opportunities, or just, get recognition for the work have you done. So I'm going to say here, this is going to be the Onyx Data Shark Tank report. I'm going to have some sample description. Very original, right? LinkedIn profile. Let's go here. Let's quickly open it up. So view my profile. That's my hyperlink. Submit the URL. Attach a file. No problem. Let's find it right here. Uploading the PBX. Just give it a second to upload. There we go. File uploaded. I always agree to the terms, right? No issue there. And submit the report. And there you go. Gives you a submission time. And at any point of time, if you decide that, hey, there's actually a few things that I want to change about the report, you already saw me doing it, right? So feel free to just simply delete the current submission and resubmit another version of the report. So that way, if you find anything, or if after, going through the report or going through the workshop, you decide, actually, there's a few things that I want to improve upon, again, adjust the report and resubmit a new one. All right. So what else we can talk about? We can talk about what's ZoomCharts, right? Because you saw that Onyx Data is hosting a challenge for the Shark Tank dataset. And one of the mini challenges is hosted or supervised, let's say like that, by ZoomCharts. So ZoomCharts is a data visualization software company. And what we do is we created our own JavaScript library for data visualization. And one of the, let's say, paths that we also have chosen are custom visuals for Power BI. Currently, we have 10 different custom visuals available, but there's more cooking in the back. So this year, we're also going to be releasing the scatter and the bubble chart. And what we're also working on is a gauge chart. So there's a few more things going on in the back, and we're always trying to improve and see what else we can do with the charts. One thing I can always, kind of recommend is if you do find anything missing from the charts, when you play around, when you're making a report, or when you're just, trying to explore what's possible, if you see anything that you feel is missing from the chart, or if you think that, this could be a really beneficial to the chart, always make sure you just reach out to the support and tell about the feature. Because think about it like this. If we know about it, if somebody has told us, this would be a great addition to the chart itself, that allows us to talk about it with the team. So there's something in front of us that we can discuss in our daily meetings. Hey, what are your thoughts about this? Should we put in the backlog? Is it something that's important here right now? Or is it something that, we can add to the visual, let's say, in a year's time? But the main thing is, if we have it, we can talk about it. If we don't have it, trust me, there's a 99% chance that the feature that you thought is so understandable might not just be added. So always, if you have something that you want to, recommend or ask as a feature, just let us know about it. And you can do that by just simply sending an email to the support team. And the email is going to be support@zoomcharts.com. Send us those requests, let us know about it, and then we can discuss it with the team and see how we can add them. So like I said, we have 10 different custom visuals, but what are they all about? So when developing visuals at ZoomCharts, there are a few key kind of pillars that we try to focus on. And one of the most important one for us is actually the ability to explore data more intuitively. And we do this by playing around with the interactions. So when we're thinking about the way you interact with the chart, we're always thinking about not just a mouse or a keyboard. We're thinking in general kind of areas also of touch-driven devices. So, because, let's be honest. Okay, sure. A lot of reports are still being used on desktop PCs or on laptops, but the world is getting a lot faster. People are moving a lot faster, and what's happening is on every day, you just want to have a quick report where you go through the main important things and just keep on going with whatever you had planned for the day. So that's why when developing the charts, we focus on touch gestures. We allow you to move around the visual to see, okay, what else is happening, and the gestures that you use are the same that you would typically use on your everyday kind of, let's say, use case of even pictures. I'm just going to give you a quick example here. So let's quickly open up this one right here. You know how it is, right? It's a live session, so of course things are going to be slower. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a live session. So let's quickly open up a report. So this is, for example, our timeline chart. And what I meant by interactions that allow you to move the chart around, it's this one. If you hover over the chart and you hold the left mouse button, you can physically move the chart to the left, to the right. You can zoom out, you can zoom in. So that way you actually start to explore the data through the charts. And what we're trying to bring to the table of Power BI users and data analysis in general is we want to give you the power of analyzing the data through the charts. So instead of focusing on, the data visualization just telling you a story, you can actually tell a story through the visuals. That's one of the things that we're focusing on. What else we focus on is the customization. So a lot of the things that we do here is trying to understand what the customers want and how they can actually achieve this. So when developing the charts, we're thinking about the customization options that the user might need and actually needs. That's why I said, if you need anything, let us know about it. We can think about it and we can add it to the visual. So one of the things that, for example, I'm really proud of is, let's say, the combo visual. The combo visual is a visual which allows you to combine columns, lines, and areas in different multiple ways. The one single chart is actually capable of creating more than 100 different variations of different chart settings. So you can create things like stacked columns, clustered columns, columns plus lines, and so forth. The same chart is capable of creating things like box and whiskers visuals, candlesticks visuals, bullet charts, and so forth. It only requires a little bit of tinkering with the data in some cases to support what you're trying to tell it there. Now, what's also coming with this is because of the customization and the intuitive navigation experience, it also allows you to have a lot better storytelling. And one of the charts that helps us with the storytelling is, now I know I'm gonna, ruff a few feathers here, because one of the most commonly used visual we have is a donut chart. And I know what you're gonna say, right? A donut chart, it's sort of a hit or miss. There's a lot of people who are gonna love the donut. There's a lot of people who are gonna say it's the worst visual that's ever been developed. I get both sides. For me, I'd say a donut chart is where it's supposed to be. If it's used correctly, it's a powerful tool. If it's used incorrectly, it's as useless as any other visual out there. Because every single visual has a specific use case that it's tailored for. And what we did with the donut chart is we tried to make it as simple as possible, yet efficient. So for example, if you want to drill down into the next level of a donut chart, you simply click on one of the slices. And what you can see happening here is instead of just physically going to, well, not instead, but let's say instead of just going to the next level, what you're also doing is you're creating these so-called inner circles. And these inner circles are there to help you with the storytelling. And what they essentially do is every single time I make a selection, the inner donut is created based on that selection. So it captures the position, the color, the size, and everything for the previously selected category. And just to give you a comparison, right? Let's be honest. Nowadays, the attention span of a person is becoming less and less. So what happens during a meetings is a lot of people get distracted for not a long time, so periods of time, but still they get distracted. So having this visual with the inner circles, with the reference layers, is what allows them to get back to what you're presenting at the screen. Because otherwise, for example, if I go and just drill down without having the inner donuts and go down to the third level, there's no way for you to know what I did previously. Unless you, for example, go for things like, let's say, dynamic titles. So having these small little things helps you with the storytelling. And that's what's also really important, that you can, like I said, you can tell the story and explore the data through the visuals. That's what it's really all about. So if you see anything that could help us improve this experience, you think could be beneficial, let us know about it. We can look at it and add it to the table. One of the reasons why all of this is so important, right? Why these interactions are so important, why you want to have all these, let's say, different ways of interacting with the chart, is because one of the core features that we think is going to be the key component of any decent report that allows you to do this fast is actually cross-chart filtering. What I mean by that is every single touch, every single action that I do with the charts actually filters out the data. So for example, if I, let's say, zoom out for this one just to have years, just so I have a little bit more dimensions to play around with. So let's say I'm interested in these 2 years, right? What I do is I hover over the x-axis, do a selection. You can see that passes out a filter. Okay. I click on the highlighted area and it zooms in to those 2 particular years. Now this is what already allows you to kind of have a fine-tuned control over the granularity and everything. Now combine this with the donut chart, for example, and you can see that also cross-filters the information. So these things combined allow you to basically move back and forth to the left, to the right through the data and tell the story. It allows you to quickly navigate and tell the story through the visuals itself. And I mean, let's be honest, there's nothing complex about clicking on a slice or a column of a chart, right? The only thing you have to do is just tell the user, hey, you can actually do that. Because I think a lot of you are used to having, external drill down buttons, for example, or you do it through a right click or these sort of things. So we wanted to eliminate that unnecessary process. We allow you to interact with the charts straightforward and get to the point. All right. So regarding the dataset, you can download it from the Onyx Data website, or you can actually see in the LinkedIn post. There's going to be a link to the reference for that. But as far as the report itself goes, let's just see what we can do about it. I'm going to quickly open up the report right here. So this is one of the iterations of the report that you can create, for example. You can see there's nothing super complex here. What you have here is a couple of cards showing just different information blocks. You have a timeline visual, you have a combo chart, and you have a donut chart. And these charts, like I said, they cross-filter each other. Now, in order to make sure that everything can be cross-filtered, you always have to ensure that the data is there to support this storytelling element. Now, if we go to the data set itself, I'm going to quickly open up the Power Query. You can see that this is what we start off with. Just give it a second. There you go. So the original data set itself, you can see, has 51 columns. Now, not even just for Power BI, but for any BI tool, I think you guys already are familiar with the concept of better have it lean and longer than to have it wide and thicker, right? So what you're doing here is trying to understand how this data set could actually be split up into multiple dimensions. And if you go through it, you can actually start to notice that there are multiple dimensions being covered here. So for example, right here, you can see, okay, so there's information about the seasons, season numbers, start date, end date, episode number, pitch number, original air date. And actually, if you scroll a bit further, one more thing that you can drag to the same concept is going to be, where it was, there's US viewership. Yeah, this one. So these columns could be, for example, one specific dimension where you're talking about the seasons. All right. If you look at the other columns, you can start to see, okay, there's actually information about the startup itself. So startup name, industry, business description, picture gender, picture city, state, and so forth. All right, that's another dimension that you can create. What else is there? You look further and then you start to see that there's actually information also about the deals that they're looking for. So for example, right here, you can see there's original ask amount, there's original valuation, equity offer, either they got a deal or not, and so forth. So basically information, we already have 3 dimensions. We have the seasons, we have the information about the companies, the startups, we have information about the deals. Let's go further. What else is there? Like I said, deal types like royalty deal, loan type, and so forth. What else? Now we have a couple of columns, which I would recommend you to unpivot. You have to transpose this and have it in a readable way. Because currently, for every single investor, you essentially have a column for the amount and for the equity. If you want to be able to use it in a, let's say, easy manner and actually something that you can put within the charts so you can cross-filter the information, you would need to turn this around and essentially have 1 column for the investor, and then you have 2 columns for the actual amount and the equity. So the result should look something like this, right? You should have investor name, amount invested, equity, was it present at the season episode or not. You can, of course, add more information if you have any. This is what I just did with the dataset itself. And we went through the investor side. One thing to note, though, is, like I said, you have to turn it around. One thing to be careful of, I can already tell you, is going to be this column. Just pay attention to it, because it works a little bit differently than, for example, this one. So you have to think about the ways and how you can actually transpose these things and pivot or unpivot to get to the wanted result. But yeah, we went through it. So essentially you have a lot of different information. A few things that you can also notice here, what I can recommend, especially for newer Power BI users, is if you go to Power Query, one thing that I recommend always to enable is under View tab, there's this little column quality. And the reason why you want to have it is because it allows you to understand which columns have information in every single cell. You can see here, it adds basically this one. So it adds valid data, errors, or empty. So that's a quick way on how you can define whether or not this is something you want to have it in a visual, right? For example, if we go to, I think one of the columns that I just haven't explored yet, I want to play around with it a bit more, is gonna be this one. So for example, you can see that only 50% of the pictures have a city. So 50% of the entries don't have any values. All right, that's something I have to keep in mind. Then you have, for example, something like picture state, 74% valid, 26% empty. Okay, and then you have a column like this, for example, pictures average age, where 93% of them are just blanks. Well, you could create analysis from that, but essentially you can only create analysis for 7% of the entries. For the rest of them, there's nothing really you can do about it. You have a null there. You can't really, put it in one bracket or the other. So those are undisclosed. So these sort of things. So just pay attention to how many entries you have within the columns, how many valid data, if you have any errors, for example, how to fix them and so forth. But just go through the columns and make sure that all the information that you are using is actually a valid source of the information. Don't do analysis on, for example, just only based on 50% of the entries. Because then if you think about the whole data set, right, I can't say that, for example, let's just assume that 50% would be from Atlanta, right? That in reality, that's 50% of 50%. So that's not physical 50%. So you have to think about these things when you're doing an analysis and describing the situation. Yeah, just always pay attention to these small little details, because those are the ones that really get you at the end, right? But yeah, what we did here is, of course, there's data dictionary. I keep it in the Power Query itself. I don't load it within the report because I don't need it, but I keep it just as a reference so we can quickly see what each column actually means, right? So what I did is create 4 dimensions. I made an investors dimension, seasons, startups, and deals offer. Those are the main ones. And what I did with it was create this one. And within this one, what we usually have is something that allows you, like I said, go back and forth and do the cross filtering with the chart. And what we have here is essentially a timeline, combo, and a donut chart. Now, what's good about this is it allows you to play around with the data. So for example, let's say I choose one specific category within the available data set, for example, food and beverage, and I can see that the highest investor that we have here, so the investor who puts in the most money in food and beverage, is Mark Cuban. If I click on Mark Cuban, I go to the seasons. But here, you actually start to go back and forth to see whether or not this information makes sense to the user. And in this case, you can just see a number 13, right? The title of the chart says investor season name. Cool, I could kind of remember this, but it's not very intuitive. So one thing I recommend you always to do is make sure that the data helps the user understand the situation that's currently visible. So one thing that we could do here is, let's quickly check also. So that's season, and that's an episode. All right. Let's open up transform data. So go back to the Power Query. Let's go to the season table. And what I'm going to do here is do a little bit of transformation. So for the season number, I'm actually going to add a prefix. And I'm going to say that this is going to be season and the number. I'm going to do the same for the episode as well. If you would want, because right now I'm essentially converting this into a text, right? If you would want to have this as a number that you can compare and say, for example, I want to look for a season that's higher than 3 or these sort of things, sure, textual information is not going to be great for that. So you can always create another column which has just a number and a separate one which has the season name. Call it like that. For me, I'm just going to keep it both textual. So I'm going to close and apply the changes. There we go. And now when I go under Mark Cuban, you can see, I think you will agree with me, right? A full text of saying season and then the season number is a lot more convenient and helps me to navigate the data a lot faster than trying to always remember what investor, season, and an episode is going to be displayed. But what happens in the back as well is you can see all this data all the time is getting cross-filtered. So for example, if we select a specific season, so I'm going to go with season 13. We can see that season 13 actually splits into 2 different years. All right. For the timeline visual, what I can do is on the top right corner, there's a display unit setting. And that allows me to choose a different granularity. And I can say here, okay, I actually want to go down to months. And you can see it split that information for the season, and you can see season was in 4 different months. So that's how the season was split up. What we can else do here is, and that's usually something I recommend always for every single report. And you can tell me in the comments whether you agree with me or not on this. So one thing you want to always have within the report is a way for the user to get back to the initial view. Currently, you can see we have filters applied from this visual, from this visual, from this visual. So getting back would require, a lot of different clicks. So what I always recommend you to do is to create a quick button which allows you to get back to the initial view. And for those of you who are more familiar with Power BI, that's probably going to be super easy. For those of you who haven't used Power BI, this is the way you do it. So you go under the View tab and you enable bookmarks. That's the first thing. And what you want to do is, so basically what bookmark does is it saves the current state of the visuals, plus the applied filters and everything, unless you change it. Then you can do different wonders with it. And what I'm going to do here is create a bookmark in this current stage. Why now? Because I don't have any active filters. I'm going to call this reset, just so I know what is what, right? Never leave bookmarks just bookmark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because when you're doing the report, sure, you're going to remember what is what, but keep in mind that you might have to come back to it a month or 2 later. And trust me, bookmark 1, 2, 3, 4 is not going to help you understand what does this bookmark do. So we created a reset bookmark. And what you also will want to do is add it as a button. So I'm going to add just a regular blank button. I'm going to place it right here. You can, of course, style it afterwards. I'm going to keep it simple. Just add text. Say that this is reset filters. There you go. Add action, and in this case it's going to call out a bookmark that we just saved reset. There we go. And now I can, for example, choose something on the combo chart that passes out a filter. I want to drill down into these 3 years. There we go. And I want to see how Kevin O'Leary is doing. Okay, brings me back because it says that's a better view for it. All right, but I now want to get to the initial view. So again, if I wanted to do it on single charts, takes a lot of time. Have a reset filters button, just a single click, and you're going back to the initial view and have no issues there. What else? So bookmarks is always something to consider to make the job for your end users a lot simpler. Because one thing that I can tell you from experience is whenever you're building the report, don't forget about the actual user of it. Because even though you feel that everything is understandable, you have no issues there whatsoever, the end user is the one that's going to be consuming the report. And if they're going to have issues with the report, it's not going to be used to its fullest potential. One of the examples that I can give to you, right? This is just an example from life. So we use a CRM internally, right? Like any other organization. And what we did is we recreated a report based on the CRM data within Power BI. What I didn't know when developing the report is that the team was already used to specific colors for specific groups. Let's say teams, call them teams. So what I did is, right, like any other company, we have our color palette that we try to kind of always stick to. So I just went with the basic color palette. I didn't think about the colors too much. So, the color palette, it goes like that. I make the report. It answers all the questions that they asked me to answer. I go to the sales manager, ask him, does it answer all the questions? Is it what you were looking for? Yes. All right. Sign off. Deal done. Now, within Power BI, for those of you who didn't know, we have the capability of looking through the actual usage of the report, right? So to see how many times it's been loaded up. And what I did is, like, after 2 or 3 weeks, I decided, okay, I actually want to see how the report is doing, right? Because they said that everything's okay. So I open it up and I see that the report is being used by 2 or 3 people, maybe once a week. Remember, at that time, we had like even a smaller team, 5 or 6 people, right? But that's a sales team. The report should not be looked at once a week on only by half of the team. So what I did is I reached out to the sales manager, got the permission, and I reached out to the sales team in general and asked them, what's wrong with the report? Why are you not using it? Because it answers all the things that you were looking for. And the answer was quite simple. The only thing that was messing up their, let's say, flow with the report is I was using the incorrect colors. Because like I said, they were used to specific colors for specific teams. The change required like 5 to 10 minute extra job just to go through the colors, apply conditional formatting when necessary and so forth. 5 to 10 minute work was the reason why they were not using the report fully. So always make sure that you double check with the end user if it's what they want and if it feels comfortable and intuitive to them. Because the least thing you want to do is create a report that's just going to sit in the shelf and, die slowly and painful. Because at the end of the day, you're going to see just your time and efforts go to waste at the end. So try to be as understanding as possible. Communicate with the requester to understand if anything is missing from the report to make it as let's say, powerful as possible. All right, we went through that. What else is there? When it comes to the timeline, one of the things that you always want to think about is also what's happening in those cases where you don't have any data. So for example, just to give an example, right? Let's go into 2013, for example. All right, on quarterly level, everything seems good. If I go to monthly level, you can see that there are 3 months that have no data. And what happens in this case is the timeline visual actually doesn't showcase the data and it doesn't remove the months. Why? Because it's actually connected to the calendar. And since it's a calendar, you cannot just skip months because you don't have any sales there. A calendar is a continuous time period. So one of the things that we allow you to do is to choose the so-called no data policy. So if we go under formatting options and series configuration, right here is the no data policy. And the best way to kind of see what it does is with columns, they all look kind of similar. But if you switch this, for example, to an area, right? remember, you can see here, there's no data here, right? If I hover over, the tooltip says just a dash, so there's no data. So if I go to no data policy, the default one is going to be join. So what join means is it's going to find the 2 points that you have available in the chart and just extend the line from one to another. And this, I think you can agree with me, if you look at the chart, it is misleading. It looks like I have sales on, for example, in this case, it looks like there's investments in every single month of the year, right? That's how it looks like. But in reality, there's 3 months that have no data whatsoever. And this is why no data policy is so important, because it allows you to switch between different properties. So the join policy is it physically connects all the dots that are available. One thing to remember though is that you always need 2 points at least in the viewport to create a connection. Now the next option we have here is 0. And what essentially 0 means is you're forcing the chart to go back to 0 and then start off from 0 again, right? So you kind of go to the dip and then you go back from it. 0 in range is for those cases where you want to define also the starting position. So whether or not it's connecting to something that's available previously, or you want to cut it off and, for example, start from a direct value. And then there's an option of skipping. So here's the main difference between 0 and skip. When I go to 0, you can see that essentially the middle point of the category or the time unit is where the value is going to go towards. So in this case, this part right here and this part right here, it looks like there's something growing and decreasing, right? Whereas in reality, there's no data whatsoever. And that's why you have an option of going with skip, which physically cuts off the data points as soon as you're out of it. One thing to be careful though here is you can see that since the middle point is the connecting point, it looks like there's half a month missing for May. If you want to know how to deal with these cases, you can always enable stepped outline, which looks like a column, but isn't really a column. It's a filled up area with just a line that's always going to be with 90-degree angles. So there's not going to be deviations from the actual results. So that's one of the things that I usually recommend to pay attention to, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to lie with your visuals. You want to be as precise as possible, and you don't want to give false expectations to the user. The same thing goes for example, when you're using tooltips. For those of you who have used, for example, native visuals, you have this field right here, right? The tooltip field. And within the tooltip field, you can add any additional information to give it more context, right? And one of the things that you got to be careful of here is that if you have a second layer available, so for example, we can do it for this one, for the combo. So for this one, I have only one single level. But let's say I add another layer, and I'm going to say under industry, I'm going to go and add a startup name. There's a bunch of them. So for example, if I go for green and clean tech, oh, there's actually 2. Perfect. This is going to be a great example. So there's only 2 of them. All right. If I decide to, let's say, add the startup name now to the tooltip, because if I hover over green and tech, that's the category name, right? If I add startup name to the tooltip content, what it's going to give me is going to be the first entry there. So I'm going to actually make these a little bit smaller, make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to understand. So green tech, you can see in the tooltip, the tooltip actually gives you an understanding as well. It tells you that first startup name is better life, right? So what the text does is finds the first value and showcases the first value. And if you look at it, it seems like if I don't pay attention to it, right? Or somebody just, when setting up the visual, doesn't catch this and sees, okay, that I automatically added first. No, that's not it. I'm just going to remove first, and it's just going to be a startup name. All right, go back to this one. Hover over, startup name, Better Life. So what the tooltip is saying to me now is that Better Life got an investment of 550K, correct? All right, let's check. If I zoom into the second layer, I can actually see that Better Life only got 400K. 150K difference? Sure. a little bit back and forth, right? But think about it if you have a lot of different categories underneath. You might have a category which has like 50K sales, whereas when the whole column is like 5 million sales. What's a little bit of a difference of a couple of million? Just 5 million there, 5 million there. It's going to be fine. I mean, I would love to be able to say that, it's just a couple of mil, but I'm not there. Hopefully one day. But I don't think your boss is going to appreciate it, right? So be careful with the information that you put in within the charts. Now, let's go back. And what I want to do is I want to quickly go through the Q&A section and see what's available here. So let's see what kind of questions you have. How do you want to deal with missing value and null? Ruqayyat asked this question. So Ruqayyat, one thing that you can see is, like I said, right, you always think about if you have enough information possible. If you have a column which has a lot of null values, the first thing you need to consider is this column actually usable within the report? You can always try to replace it with something more definite. Let's say if you have a null, just always replace it with not specified. In those cases, you can at least use it within the report, because then you can get the actual percentage of a value, right? Similar to how I said, let's say I only have 50% of the states available. One of the states is going to be, let's say, California. 50% of 50%, it's a bit of a different number. So replacing all the states that don't have a value with not specified would give me the actual total number and the correct percentage. So that's one of the ways on how you can deal with it. Question from Bimal. Could you please show the relationship between the tables? Sure. So what I did in this case is I went with the star schema. So I kept the fact table, the whole table that we had initially at the center, and then I added all the dimensions regarding the separate information blocks. So seasons, deal offers, investors, and startups. This report, actually, we're gonna add it to one of the emails that we're gonna send to you afterwards. So for those of you who are here today, you're gonna have an email which is gonna have a link to this report that you can download and play around with. All right, next one from Jaishri. How can it be helpful when creating infographics and not dynamic reports? That's a tricky one. I'd say with infographics, it's a little bit more different, because with infographics, you're essentially looking at it from a different perspective, right? What we're trying to do with ZoomCharts, we're always going towards that dynamic part of it. We want to create reports which allow you to start off with an overview and then go down to the details based on the questions that you get asked. With infographics, you need to look at the bigger picture always, while still providing enough insights. So with infographics, one of the things that I would recommend is think about what charts to use and what information are the charts displaying. So think about always the labels, the label placements, the tooltips, add tables if it's necessary. Just provide context so that whenever a user is looking at the infographic, he can actually read the whole story. Don't create infographics which don't tell the real actual story and just gives you bits and bobs of information, right? Because at the end of the day, well, a good data visualization is going to tell a story. What you see a lot of the cases in public space are infographics, which when you look at it, yeah, they look nice, right? They're visually appealing, for example. But when you try to read information, it's like, what the hell am I looking at? It makes no sense. Like, for example, we had a data visualization done by, I don't want to, let's say, shame anybody, but we do have a compilation. I have a compilation of different images from different public data visualizations that I've found across the internet on my everyday walks, around the streets and everything. So one of the visualizations that I found was super heavy misleading. There was an image of a euro, right? So it's a European country, right? I'm just not going to tell you which one. So it was a picture of a euro, and the euro was the center of a donut chart, right? And you had slices around the euro. And essentially what the infographic was about, it was to tell the people how every single euro that was gained by the government is being spent back to the people, right? So what are the expenses by every euro gained? And what they decided was a great idea is just completely ignore relative sizing. So what you had here was basically, like 25% was, I don't know, let's call it military expenses. Then you had like 15%, which was almost the same size as 25%, which was education, for example, and so forth. And the best part of it was, instead of adding a section, for example, others, like in this case, right? What they did is they actually had a label with like 5 or 6 different segments where the money is going. And the other size, actual size, was like, should be like 1%, right? Because those were the smaller one segments that they had. But in order to support the label, it was like 15%. So when you were looking at the chart in whole, it was like, how can you read this or tell a story through this? So just be careful with what the graph is showing. That's one of the rules I would say goes for the infographics. What else? You have to understand the domain of the data sets. First, you need to unpivot the investor names and amount. That should eliminate a lot of missing values. A part of it, yeah. How do you split these data sets into different tables? So what I did in this case is I did the initial transformations on the original data set. Then I duplicated the original data set and removed the unnecessary columns. That's how I did it. There's probably different other ways on how you can do this. Next one. Can you show the data model? Yeah, sitting right here. How to deal with missing values. We already covered that. Thanks for that. No worries. So for picture gender column, for example, where we have some missing values, we can put in not specified for those missing data for the use to our analysis on the gender distribution. Sure, you can. Just make sure, like I said, that you don't keep the null values as is, right? Provide some sort of a name to it so it has some sort of a meaning. So you can say, so the current distribution is like this, keeping in mind that 80%, for example, don't have a gender specified. Just to kind of tell the complete story. If you needed to provide a KPI for this visual, how can you provide an ad hoc request for KPI indicators? I'll be honest, Jordan, I'm not entirely sure what you wanted to get from this. Maybe I'm not just getting it. Maybe you can, I don't know, word the question a little bit differently. Maybe it's just, the evening for me and lack of coffee could be one of those. Are there special features on ZoomCharts that are interesting to know or use and that are different from the normal charts? Yeah, sure. So one of the capabilities that we have within the visual is you're going to see we do a little bit of a different focus on the field setup for things like time series and combo visuals. So I can quickly open up a different sample report. And there's a reason for that, just because I have a data set that already supports this a little bit better, right? So just give me a second. Whilst I'm doing that, one thing I can quickly remind you guys is that there's a lot of resources available where you can learn about the ZoomCharts visuals and what are the main capabilities for each and every one of them. One of the easiest ones and one that I usually recommend, because people always have documentation. We do have an extensive documentation, but let's be honest, right? Not everybody's favorite activity is just going through 300 pages of bland text documentation, which does have some GIFs, but you have to read it and go through every single line. It takes a lot of time. So one of the things that you can always do is actually use our academy. Some of these resources you have already been sent through different emails. So what Academy is, it's a free resource. It doesn't require you any payments. You don't need to have a subscription or anything. It's a free resource that allows you to learn about every single one of our visuals. So for example, let's say I want to learn about the combo chart, which was one of the charts that was in the report. You can see here, there are different sections where we go through the basic intro about the chart, what the chart is about, what are the main features and formatting options, how to set it up, what are the interactions, legends, axes, and so forth. So there's a lot of different kind of deep dive into the visual. And this will allow you to get the necessary information to understand what are the main things you need to know about the visual prior to starting to work with it. That's one of the things. Great experience. Yeah, I'm not gonna submit it because I don't want to, mess up the ratings for actual users. So what else is there? One of the things that I always also recommend is there's a separate section within the Academy. Actually, what I forgot to do is, come on, there you go. What I forgot to do was send you guys the link to the Academy, right? So chat, paste, there you go. That's the link to the Academy. All these links will be sent to you afterwards as well. I'm just giving to you so you can open it whilst we're here. So that's the Academy. The other thing that I recommend you to do is go listen to this playlist, which is about drill down reports. So drill down reports is the principle that we try to build the visuals upon. And that is that these reports allow you to start off in an overview and then drill down into details by interacting through the visuals. It tells you about the main kind of let's say main components that the report has, the main idea behind it, what are the design aspects that you need to take into consideration, and so forth. So if you have the time, and you want to learn more about it, just feel free to use the resource at your disposal. What else is there? There's always going to be some blog posts. So within our website, we have blog that covers different variety of topics. You can see we go, for example, the ultimate guide on how to choose which visual to have, what kind of chart types the visuals have, and so forth. What we do a lot of the time as well is we do have some charts which look familiar at surface level, but are completely different at the core level itself. So for example, we have a network and a graph visual, and we have a time series and a timeline visual. Whilst they do look the same on a first glance, right? The core components and the way that the visual works are completely different. And that's why we have these blog posts which describe the differences and the use cases for each and every one of them. What else? Don't be afraid to use the report examples, which are right here. If you're on the website, it's under resources right here, report examples. These are completely free resources. You can always choose, for example, I don't know, you like this one, for example, right? You open it up, give it a second, right? Like I said, it's a live session, so there's always going to be a little bit of a hiccup with the speed of opening things. But what you can do here is you can, of course, open up an embedded version of the report and play around with it, see how things interact with each other, how things work together, and so forth. So just to see how things get filtered out and these sort of things. But what's most important, top right, this button right here. Every single report that you see in our report example gallery is publicly available for download. So you can download every single one of them, go through them, see the visual configuration, see the formatting options that we've used, and so forth. So you can use that as a basis, for example, for your report as well. There's no rules against that. A few things that I also wanted to remind before we, move and go through the last Q&A questions. One thing that I want to ask for you guys is, I do know that it's always a tricky subject and a sensitive subject that you don't want to touch. But I just posted in the chat a link to a survey. The survey is relatively small. And the main reason why I would ask you to fulfill it is for us to collect feedback on the webinar itself. Because it's the same approach for the visuals as I have for these sort of webinars. I don't want to make a webinar just because, right? I don't want to make a workshop just because. We want to understand, was this webinar useful? Did you learn something new and useful? Are there any specific topics that you want us to cover in the next workshop? Unable to see. All right, let me quickly check. Let me just double check as well. Is it the same for everyone? Can anybody open up the survey, or nobody is able to open it up? Just a quick question. Okay, so some people are already able to open. Okay, so Kratik maybe try to open it through a different browser or something. I don't know what could be the cause of it, but should be good to go. But yeah, guys, please fill in the surveys. You don't have to do it straight away. You can do it a little bit later. There's going to be a survey also in the emails as a follow-up, just to make sure that you have the time to do it. And what I would say is, don't be afraid to be as harsh as you want to be. If there's something negative about the workshop itself, if you didn't like something about it or you thought was completely redundant, just tell us about it. Trust me, I'm not going to get offended. I just want to make sure that these workshops are useful and beneficial to you. Okay? Because the least thing I want to do is just have, like I said, a workshop just because. I want to be able to provide something back to the community that is given to me so much. So tell me how I can improve upon it, and I'll be able to deliver it on the next workshop. What else is there? If you do have any questions for the next webinar, let's say you play around with the reports itself and you think, I actually wanted to ask something, maybe they can prepare something for the next webinar. Right here, email webinars@zoomcharts.com. Send us all your questions that you have regarding the report building process. If you have any inquiries regarding the technical aspects of the product, if some of the features are not working, if you have any issues, let us know about it and we'll get back to you. So that's one of the things. And the last but not least, we already had it in the beginning of the session, is the link to the registration form for the second workshop. So make sure you register, because what we're going to be doing on the next workshop is actually focusing on something a little bit different. This time, like I said, we focused on the core visuals, like the timelines, the combo, and the donut chart. For the next session, we're going to be focusing on visuals, which, like I said, are a little bit more specific. So things like map visuals, network charts, graph visuals, and these sort of things. So we want to give you as much information as possible and showcase you the capabilities of the charts to broaden your kind of view of what's capable, what are the possibilities of the chart. Starting to stumble, right? Getting a little bit late. So that goes for that. I don't think I missed anything important. Let me just double check with the team if they're not posting and blowing up the team's chat. I think I did most of the parts. Opening up the Q&A quickly. By when can we get the recording for the session? That's a good question. Maybe somebody from the team can send me a message. I think the recording should be available tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Don't blame me, but I think that should be that should be the deadline, I would say. Tomorrow. Got the message. Tomorrow is going to be available. All right. Other than that, how I finish up any training session or any workshop, right? The same goes here. You can post it in the chat, and I have only one question towards you guys. Was the session helpful? And were you able to learn something new and actually useful? Because learning something new is very simple. I could say something like, I don't know, my height is 120 centimeters. Awesome. Was it useful? Probably not. So were you guys able to learn something new and actually useful from the session? If yes, then my job is done. All right. Happy to hear that. Other than that, thank you so much, guys, for spending the time, for allowing me to present this. Of course, I want to thank also Onyx Data for providing us with this opportunity to be a part of the event. Always been a part of the community, just not from this side. So this is a new experience for me as well. So far, I'm loving it. And I'm looking forward to seeing all the submissions, going through the reports and seeing how our visuals and the same data set can actually be just showcased from a different perspective. That's what I want to see about this and learn. What else am I missing, for example? All right, guys. Thanks for the time. Now it's time to rest or, start creating the report. And I'll see you on the next session, which is going to be next week on Tuesday. Don't forget to register. If you have any questions, send us an email. All right, guys. Thank you so much. And that's going to be goodbye from me. Bye, everyone.